jam-packed day, so we should start with our first panel, which is Developments and Innovations in Sports Media. And this will be moderated by Christine Simpson. You know her from Hockey Night in Canada. She actually got her start at the Hockey Hall of Fame as the marketing manager. She was the first in-arena host for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And there are few people who can make someone as comfortable in an interview as Chris Simpson. And you'll see that in the features that she does for Rogers Hometown Hockey, for Hockey Night in Canada, and for Sportsnet. Scott Moore is here, also the CEO of Uninterrupted Canada, my former boss, so I don't have to be as careful as what I say about him. He actually started his career at Ryerson Radio and Television Arts Program. Prior to joining Rogers, he was a director at CBC Sports. We also have Shawn Redmond, the VP of Discovery Networks and TSN Bell Media. He does content strategy and business operations. Prior to this role, he was the Vice President of Programming and Marketing, and he was actually an instrumental part of TSN's high-profile expansion to 5 national feeds back in 2014. And finally, we have Chris Wilson, the Executive Director of CBC Sports and Olympics. And prior to joining CBC, he spent nearly 10 years as the Director of Marketing for Swimming Canada, and he also served as Manager of Events for the organization. He will oversee his first Olympic broadcast next summer in Tokyo. So Chris and the panelists, come to the stage.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that lovely introduction. And thank you to my panelists for being here, all of you to be here in the morning. No pressure, we're just kicking off this 2-day event. For me, it's been actually great to meet Chris and to Shawn, who I had not met before. Scott, like Carolyn, is my former boss, and the credit or the blame goes to him for starting me off in my career in broadcasting, as he hired me back in 1998 to be on Sportsnet. So thank you for that, Scott. So our topic, gentlemen, developments and innovations in sports media. So to start, I do want to, it's kind of the elephant in the room, probably the biggest development in sports media this week, of course, was Don Cherry's departure from Hockey Night in Canada. Scott, you actually were Don's boss twice, first at CBC Sports and then again at Rogers when we took over the Hockey Night in Canada package. Just would like to get your thoughts on what we all saw happen this week.
Well, I see why Carolyn says you make people feel comfortable in an interview. Just lob a fucking grenade out there and have me jump on it.
I'm really glad you started with Scott.
It's what I do best, right?
The pin's even out of the grenade. Look, I would preface what I'm going to say by saying that Bart Yabsley is one of my closest friends in the business and an upstanding and great guy. Don Cherry is an incredibly close friend, and Ron MacLean is an incredibly close friend. I think the events of the last 10 days or so have been really unfortunate for Don and for Rogers. It's not the way anybody wanted for Don's career to come to an end. He has been the most influential hockey commentating voice in Canada for the last 40 years. And I'd say just a couple things without getting into the issue itself, because I'm not going to take a position on that. First off, for those of you who were hoping to see Bart here, I can tell you from experience, I went through something similar at CBC with the Hockey Night in Canada theme song, and I think I hid in my condo for a week. Mm-hmm. You get everything from the Twitter lynch mobs coming after you to death threats. So for Bart to have been here today, it would have been all anybody wanted to talk about, and I think that would have been unfair to him and unfair to the conference. Don Cherry, for those of us who know him, is one of the most loyal human beings on the planet, and so I think it's been tough for him. And maybe the most important thing I'd want to say is about Ron MacLean. Ron has been caught in the crossfire on this, and I talked to him, I think, on Wednesday and said to him exactly what I would say to you about Ron. That if he was blaming himself for any of this, it's wholly unfair. And I'll tell you why. First of all, in a live environment, for him to have even noticed that something was awry and it was not incredibly obvious to everyone at the time, for him to have noticed it while he's getting spoken to in his ear, while he's having to worry about getting to a videotape, while he's trying to get to a commercial, that would have been impressive enough for him to notice it. And then for him to have to react and solve it, not in the moment, but in the second, when it literally has taken a group of fairly smart executives 24 to 36 hours to figure out how to deal with it. So for people to say that Ron should have solved this problem, they're naive about the process and being unfair to Ron. So I just think it's been a tough week for all involved. You guys?
Over to you, Shawn,
Grenade over
Chris.
here. It hasn't exploded yet.
Any
that I know of.
comments?
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's not my place to comment on what happened last week, but it made me think about, in general, beyond sports, just social media, the dialogue, the nature of the dialogue, how we treat each other. I think Wednesday or Thursday of last week was supposed to be World Kindness Day, and I think it was a little ironic. We probably could use a little more kindness online. So, I mean, it was a tough week for the industry, but yeah, I hope that we can figure out a way to be a little more productive on social media.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Scott said it well. We were in an awkward place of not having editorial control over the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast, but it being on our network. A lot of Canadians not fully understanding that relationship, not that they should, and having a great partnership with Sportsnet in terms of working with them on a regular basis to make sure that hockey gets to as many Canadians as possible. So we were, being supportive of our partner. We were trying to make sure that we were in touch with them, but ultimately that was a fully Sportsnet decision that we were just going to support. And as Scott said, I mean, Bart's an incredible guy, and I talked to him a number of times last week, and we knew that they were going to deal with it, whatever the decision, they were going to deal with it in a professional way, and they did, and onward and upward.
But what Shawn said, I think, is a great point. Social media today has made everybody's jobs 700% more difficult. And there are Twitter lynch mobs just waiting for anybody to make any type of misstep and to jump on them. And there are, on this issue, there are Twitter lynch mobs on both sides of it.
Yep.
And being equally unpleasant, equally anonymous, equally just brutal online.
I do have to ask, though, on this topic of social media, because I was doing the game in Montreal that night and didn't really hear it in my ear. And as usual, something big's happening when you look at what's trending across Canada, and then you delve in a little further to find out. Don was obviously trending for most of the week. But the question to you all is, how much value do you put into the feedback that you do get on Twitter? I mean, there was a time where you would, I'm sure, have focus groups or look at the ratings to determine who, on your airwaves people like, or which shows are popular. Well, you can see that real time on social media. But can you believe it? Does it give you a false impression of what the majority of the people out there are thinking? Or do you look at that and think, okay, this is going to be a big tool for us deciding what we do about an on-air personality or a show or your network?
You had a good story?
Yeah, I think for me, it's interesting. We're talking about the obviously the downside of social media with what happened last week, but in general, from an engagement perspective for all of us up here as media companies, it's been a tremendous tool to reach people, to engage consumers in a new way, to engage young people, to create dialogue about our properties and about our broadcasts in a whole different way. So there's a tremendous upside to the platform and how it reaches people. But yeah, it's one data point of many when it comes to feedback. I mean, I was telling the group earlier, sometime around 2011 or 2012, we started getting calls from our partners who are outside of Canada asking what's going on with their broadcasts. You can imagine in sports, nothing goes to time. I lead our Discovery Networks business at Bell Media as well, and we schedule a show for an hour, it's 1 hour. A hockey game never goes 2.5, a football game never goes 3, and so we're constantly adjusting our schedules based on, what's happening on the field of play. And all of a sudden we started getting feedback from partners saying, hey, what's going on with my event? I'm missing the first 5 minutes. So you quickly realize that our partners are now getting real-time feedback as well on what's happening, and it forced us to completely change the way we communicate with our partners outside the country. But in general, I do think it's been a tremendous tool for engagement. I look at some of our league partners in the room, and I know we're working together to engage fans in these platforms. And as much as last week was a tough week, as much as there is Twitter lynch mobs that jump on the negative things that people say or do, there's also a tremendous upside in how we create more engagement in the world of sports, and I think we have to find the balance around that line.
Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, we have fortunately smarter people, at CBC than me that can help sort of crunch those things through research and try and make sure that you're not just emotionally reacting to what might just be literally a small number of people that are emotionally reacting to something, because we're all human. You take a look at that and it does have an impact. So I've learned to try and let the smart people tell me if that's actually like a thing we need to worry about, or if it's just a smaller group. But I agree with Shawn. For us, it's generally been more positive. But last week, if anything, showed just how prepared you have to be, and you got to really make sure you have a good response plan in place, and who's going to be involved when, and how you're going to deal with it, because it can crop up just so quickly.
Social media is a great tool, but it's just a tool. It's a great tool to gauge certain parts of the audience reaction and to get feedback in real time. But there are different parts of social media, and I think you have to use those tools in conjunction with real research, in conjunction with focus groups, and you have to realize the strengths and weaknesses of each platform. I always say Facebook's where people go to like, Twitter is where people go to hate. And unfortunately, it's been way too much of that. If I fired everybody that Twitter told me to fire on a Sunday morning or on a Monday morning, then there'd be nobody in this room, and Burke would have been the first out the door. Well, no, second. But so you have to be careful and realize if you read Twitter particularly, the negative tends to outweigh the positive, probably by about 65 to 35. And you go and see some of the negative stuff that's said. I like to, for fun, go see the most negative and check on those people's profiles, and usually they have 3 followers and they're named @Dan22.
Yeah, they're not really putting their names out there. Fair enough.
I'm just going to ask that no one tweet a picture of me in front of this big Sportsnet logo. I wasn't told about that today. I showed up at the conference.
Now that'll get, let's go. All right, so social media technology, I mean, it's all about how these innovations are changing sports media. So I want to ask now, how is the technology around today, driving fan consumption of sports? How fans get, see, and view their sports?
When I started in the business, I would say evolution was at a Darwinian pace. In 1984, we went from 1-inch tape to 3/4-inch tape in the matter of a couple of months. Evolution has now moved to a point where the people who are just flopping up on the shore are swinging from the trees next week.
Yeah.
That's the pace of evolution, and it is changing at an unbelievable pace. You got to keep up with it. You got to keep ahead of it. You got to be on top of what your audience wants. And Shawn and I talked about this a little bit in our pre-discussion. Evolution can put legacy players out of business, but the smart legacy players, the ones with strong brands, are the ones that have the best chance to win, because they're the ones who not only have the brand, who have the audience, who have the following, but if they're on top of the evolutionary technological changes, they can still win. It's not going to be just the upstarts. And I think you look at some of the upstarts that have come out in the business as it relates to sports. Twitter, Facebook, Amazon have been abject failures at revolutionizing the way traditional sports are broadcast. They've all tried to do traditional broadcasts, and they've all failed at them. And the legacy players are back doing most of the broadcasts and using those other platforms as additions to their broadcasts.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is looking at where the technology is going. And I think what we're seeing is the ease of distribution, the reduced cost of distribution on the internet or mobile has opened up a whole new world of people who can create content. We're all walking around with not only a reception device to watch content, but we can create content with our mobile devices. It's unbelievable. We're a couple years away from going 5G in this country. I mean, our parent company, Bell, is investing a ton of money in that. That's going to change the game in terms of speed of video, interactivity of video. It really is going to escalate once again, what you can do in your devices. So we're seeing these new players come in and invent new technology, bringing production costs down so we can offer niche content. I was thinking last week, I went to St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I can watch, the Huskies beat up on the Dow Tigers, one of my favorite things in the world, on a 3-camera shoot, that's pretty cheap. And I understand that, look, that's not a high-end production, but that's okay because there's only a handful of people who care, a handful of people who watch, and we're going to be okay with that level of production versus not having it on available at all. But that's not coming at the expense of investing in the big broadcast. I mean, we continue to see huge investments in technology around, whether it's 4K going to 5G, it's the graphics, the data, the interactivity of the broadcast, the virtual first down lines. I mean, the amount of investment and evolution that's happening in the big broadcasts is equal, if not outpacing, the evolution in sort of the smaller niche broadcasts. So what I think as a media company is that the world of sports is growing, consumption is growing, it's not coming at the expense of one or the other, and I think that's good for all of us. In the worlds that we live in, we know all the benefits of sports, we get the tribalism, we get the live nature of having to watch it live, we get the fact that we're connected to these teams, and I just see the value of sports increasing as we find a way to create more consumption. It's not cannibalizing itself, it's actually creating more engagement and more consumption on sports in general, which is good for everybody in this room.
Yeah, we're meeting with a company this week that specializes in the niche sort of streaming that Shawn was talking about. And we do a lot of that. I mean, as a public broadcaster, I personally think it's our space where we should be in, is making sure that we're providing that sort of content to communities that really care about that, because we're not in the business of necessarily competing with a TSN or a Sportsnet. We don't have the full-time linear channels. We shouldn't be in that space with tax dollars, but we should be really covering our Canadian athletes and those unique Canadian stories. So we're meeting with a company this week that nobody in this room would have ever heard of, that last month streamed over 550,000 hours of sports content in 1 month. Like, we do about 10, 11,000 in a year currently. I'd love to grow that. They did 550,000 hours in 1 month. And they have the technology that they're basically limitless in how much they can take. So, that's incredible, first of all. But there's also a whole bunch of these other streaming services that have popped up. It's not hard to start one. It's really hard to get noticed. And so when you do have a brand or you do have reach, we end up partnering with some of them. This season, we did a CPL contract with One Soccer. They had their OTT player, but they needed to let people know that those soccer games were going to be available. So we did 12 games on our broadcast. We did another 12 games streaming, and it was a good win-win relationship. And so we'll work with anybody to try and bring good content to Canadians. But I think it's one thing to start up those services. It's a whole other thing to try and get noticed, because a lot of them are spending a lot of money trying, and I'm not sure it's working.
Yeah, the two biggest developments that will impact sports broadcast over the next 5 years in ways that we have only started to see are direct-to-consumer, or OTT, and sports betting. And the direct-to-consumer is because you have ultimate bandwidth. Even with Shawn's 4 channels, Sportsnet's 5 channels. Five channels, sorry. 5 channels in sports. How many does Sportsnet have? Is it 6? Sorry.
6.
I've lost count now. So out of it. There's a limited shelf space, and in prime time, there's a limited shelf space. Every sport, every game, every contest can be broadcast, and broadcast in multiple ways to multiple different endpoints. So if you're a consumer, you can watch on your big screen TV, you can watch on your tablet, you can watch on your phone, you can watch the English broadcast, you can watch the Punjabi broadcast, you can watch the Japanese broadcast. Soon you'll be able to watch a broadcast that is brought to you by regular commentators. You'll be able to watch a broadcast that's all about sports betting. You may be able to watch a broadcast that is specifically targeted to high-end stats geeks. Those are the types of things that you can do now with an unlimited schedule. So that's the one area that I think is going to just have an explosion effect on sports media. The other is sports betting. Sports betting, as it becomes legal in Canada, and I believe it will be legal in Canada the next 2 years, will impact every part of the sports ecosystem, from more data points that the teams will want to put out, to player tracking, to player evaluation, to stickiness of the broadcast, because people who otherwise weren't betting will now be betting simple prop bets, technology on how to do those simple prop bets. I think those two big issues are going to make our current sports media environment unrecognizable in 5 years.
Well, I did a game in New Jersey actually last Wednesday. Sports betting is legal now in New Jersey, and so we did a little in-game story on it. They have a sports betting lounge in Prudential Center where you're encouraged to go to download the app so you can be sitting in your seat betting on any part of the game. They put the betting odds on the Jumbotron during the game. On the MSG broadcast of the Devils games now, at intermission, they put up a full page to tell you what the betting odds right now are on the next faceoff. It blew me away that this is starting to happen now. I guess, Scott, as you said, as it becoming, clearly it's something that the NHL resisted for a long time. Now,
All the leagues did.
Absolutely. I'm sitting from where I am, just more aware of it from the NHL world. But I guess, as you said, Scott, how much will that impact as you are looking to get more viewers? Because the good news is there's lots of options for you out there, more than ever. The bad news is, how do you get people's attention? And I guess sports betting, when you have a vested interest in it, you might get viewers that aren't necessarily a huge fan of that sport, but they become a lot more interested in it when they have something invested in it. Make sense?
Yeah, I saw a stat somewhere last week that I think the number was a fan is 80% more likely to watch a game that they have bet on than not, and my honest reaction was only 80. Like, I really thought it'd be even higher. I think that, if you have some money, some skin in the game, yeah, you're watching. So for all of us that look to, even there's a piece that relates to, financial opportunity and monetizing gambling. Then there's a piece that just relates to people being engaged in watching what we produce. And I think that's, for a broadcaster, the two sides of that are interesting to me, because it's 80, 90, 95% if someone's going to be involved in that game from a gaming perspective, they're watching. And I think that's good for us.
Yeah, I personally wonder how broad that'll be. Like, I still think it'll be around the biggest events where there'll be mass appeal. I don't know if you're going to get, increased numbers on a Tuesday night Milwaukee-Detroit Pistons game. There'll be that hardcore group that's trying to make up for their weekend losses. But I'm not sure if it's going to be driving massive numbers. But it's definitely going to have an impact on getting people to stick around the game, because I think the technology has made it so easy for people to consume sports without watching 3 hours. I know so few people that will sit in front of a game from start to finish 3 hours long now. It's incredible. If you got kids and you're around, you're busy, but you can just keep in touch, there's less need to make sure you're home by 7 to check it out. I just think it's changing so radically.
I hate to disagree with another bald guy.
Explain why the leagues resisted the risk.
Yeah, the risks were the ethics of the sports. They were worried that players would be influenced by bookies and by professional sports bettors. They were worried that players, umpires, referees would be influenced by this. There have been instances of that in the past. In professional soccer in Europe, there's a very famous NBA case with an NBA referee. But they're putting more and more safeguards in place. And again, that goes to some of the other technology that will be in place, and that's AI. to be able to analyze what the referees and players are doing, and if the referees are going outside of their normal calls, their average calls on a regular basis, they'll get called on it, right? I was going to say that I hate to disagree with another bald guy, but I disagree with you around the Tuesday night broadcasts. I think sports betting as it evolves will engage people 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The most important thing for sports betting, though, is everybody here is a sports fan, but I would bet you that at least 30-40% of you, including me, would go into a sports book in Vegas and look at the LED boards and go, what the hell is all this? I don't get how this is done. It's too intimidating. I don't want to go and place a bet. And by the way, in Vegas, then you have to go back 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later and collect on the bet. Now you'll be able to do it off your phone. You'll be able to do it in real time. You'll be able to do prop bets that are as easy as will Pascal Siakam hit the next 2 point, right? And those are the developments that are going to democratize sports betting, hopefully in a way that engages people and hopefully in a way that doesn't make everybody broke.
I totally agree. It will be 7 days. I'm just not sure it's going to take a 250,000 person broadcast to 500,000 necessarily, but I definitely could be wrong.
Scott, what's a prop bet?
Oh, prop bet is betting on specific outcomes in a game. So you can bet on anything from who's going to score the most points. Is Aaron Rodgers going to throw a 30-yard, or is he going to hand off? Those are the type of prop bets that you will see. There's some latency issues that we'll have to get dealt with, but those things are coming. We're seeing technology every day on how to do that and do it easier and easier and easier.
All right, from sports betting to esports, I want to ask you about now. I had my very first experience in this actually in Las Vegas in June, there for the NHL Awards, and the day before, went over to the Luxor Hotel to see the NHL Gaming World Championship Final. Blew me away that these kids playing was drawing not only people there, but on the NHL's Twitch channel. I'm sounding old because I didn't know what that was until then. How big is esports now and gaming? How much bigger do you think it'll be, and how does something like that translate into the television sphere? Open it up for discussion.
First off, esports is here to stay, for sure. Esports is going to be around for a while. Esports and e-gaming is particularly popular amongst a certain demographic. We've been looking at a lot of esports. I have another company other than Uninterrupted called Playmaker Capital, which is a capital venture firm that looks at investing in sports and technology around the world. And so we've looked at esports a lot. And I wouldn't invest in it right now. I think the best time to invest in it was 3 years ago when the valuations were low. And there'll be another time to invest in about 2 years when there's a huge correction. And there will be, in my opinion, a huge correction around it. There's too many players out there. There are too many leagues out there. There's too many franchises out there. It's not sustainable. If you buy a franchise and pay $40 million for an Overwatch franchise in Toronto, and then somebody else says, well, you know what, we're going to just start up a Call of Duty franchise in Toronto, and somebody else may get that franchise. It'd be like the Maple Leafs being told, well, you know what, we like the fact that you've got the NHL franchise in Toronto. We're starting a 3-on-3 hockey franchise just down the street, and you're going to be fighting for the same viewers, the same sponsors, the same audiences. There will have to be a correction. Just last point on valuations. Forbes put out a list of all the top esports companies, but I think it was last week. There are 5 esports companies that are valued over $300 million now, and that's based on minuscule revenues. And as an investor, I look at that and say, okay, I'm prepared to invest when you're showing me real revenues. And that business will evolve, and it will be a long-term business, but they've got to find the right revenue model, they've got to find the right sponsors, and they've got to find the right level of number of franchises and number of leagues.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you in that it's here to stay. There's no denying that. When we look at the profile of the audience, you know, the percentage of people, the proportion of young people that are gaming as one of their primary sources of entertainment. Sure. Sorry. Better? When you look at the audience, when you look at what young people are doing, their habits, you know, how much time they spend gaming on the aggregate, it's clearly here to stay. You know, the publishers are making a ton of money. The engagement is there. There's tons of young people playing. We all see it. Anybody that has kids that are teenagers sees how much we game. You know, for us in this room, it's interesting to think about, we're not the publisher. We're not selling the games. We're not selling the little upgrades inside the game that make all the money. So we have to think about what's our role in this. On one hand, you know, I know from my own experience, because we're the sports network inside a big media company, it always comes back to us saying, what's your esports strategy? Because it's sports. And I'm not sure that's necessarily the right place for it to land. But at the end of the day, you can't ignore the size of the audience. So as a media player for us, you know, we're looking at what is our role. Our role is probably not to try and take, you know, a 3-hour Overwatch competition and turn it into a hockey game and sort of take a square peg and put it into a round hole. But we've got a giant platform, a giant megaphone, a giant brand. We have big digital platforms, big mobile platforms. We have a big show like SportsCenter where we talk to, you know, millions of Canadian sports fans every day. We also are part of a vertically integrated company that sells internet and broadband to these gamers, the lifeblood of what they're doing. So I think our role in e-gaming will likely be from a bit of a different angle. And I think we started to think differently when we got away from trying to take an esports competition and make it into a football game, right? We've done some of that. I really think the role for us will be how do we make the sport bigger, the competition bigger, the players bigger, and ultimately play a bit of a different role than just trying to make a 2.5-hour broadcast and have it replicate a traditional sport.
Yeah, without sounding like the get off my lawn guy, my answer to the CBC board of directors when I got asked about this recently was, I'm trying to do everything we can at CBC Sports to use our Olympic rights to inspire young kids to get off the couch. So for now, we're going to really stay focused on trying to use the stories that we tell to motivate kids to get into sport and get off the couch and get active. And if we can find a way to use esports eventually to do that, we'll be all in. And, you know, I'm not trying to put my head in the sand, but we can't do everything for everyone. So for now, we're going to really just try and focus on that. And
if you want to look at the future of esports, you need to follow where the money's going. And right now, the only people making money in esports are the publishers. And I met with a publisher in my old job at Sportsnet. I won't tell you which publisher they were, but they came in and said, we want you to broadcast this tournament, and we want you to do a 3-week series on our game. And I looked at them and said, what's in it for me? Well, you get programming. I said, yeah, we like to make money with our programming. Well, you'll get audiences. Well, the audiences for that programming are not actually that high on television. And I looked at them and I said, so I'm going to do 21 hours of infomercial for your game. I'll do that if you give me a 15% cut of the sales of your game. The meeting ended.
Yeah,
I've had a few of those myself.
Yeah.
That sounds very familiar.
Not surprising at all. Women's sports on television. I just think for us at Sportsnet last year, the CWHL All-Star Game, huge success. You know, we're an all-female broadcast team, really good ratings. The sad news, of course, CWHL folded shortly after that. How do you balance the probably the outcry from many of us saying there should be more women's sports on TV with the bottom line of your business that you were just talking about, needing to do the things that are going to get the most eyeballs? How do you strike that balance, and how do you see the general idea of more women's sports on TV being viable?
I'll go only because for us it's a little different. And you know, sort of like trying to use the Olympics to motivate kids, we see our responsibility is trying to do things that others either can't or won't because of the commercial setup that might result. So we think that for us to provide audiences with an equal chance to see men and women is really important. And we're already basically at that 50-50 because of the nature of the sports we cover, happening to be, almost all offered in men's and women's, and around the Olympics, especially now. The Canadian women's Olympic team is generally, stronger than the men. So we know heading into Tokyo, we're going to just be dominated by incredible women's sports stories. But we've made a decision, not just because it's right, but because we think it makes us different, to make sure that in everything we do, for how much written stories we do, for the streaming, for the broadcasting, that we're going to be as close to equal as possible. But we can do that as a public broadcaster, and it's a long runway, but we're committed to it for the long term. And again, it's a little different because we don't have shareholders that we have to report to, so we can do it. And we're really proud of the fact that we'll be able to carry that torch for making sure that there's equal opportunity for young girls to look up and see their heroes on media as young boys.
Yes, certainly. We're big believers in it at our place, and I can speak from experience. I wouldn't sleep on the business opportunity. This September, Bianca Andreescu made the finals of the U.S. Open, as we all know. The average minute audience of that broadcast was 3.5 million. That was bigger than the average minute audience of the Stanley Cup final last year. That was a monster moment to bring us all together. We saw what happened in Mississauga at the Square when she won. It was a big deal. This summer we did the Women's World Cup, which was again that event. For us, when I think about going to FIFA and pitching that partnership back in 2010, we saw the opportunity of the 2015 Women's World Cup in Canada, and going forward, seeing the growth of that property has been unbelievable. To Chris's point, we had an all-female panel for the first time. They were outstanding. The feedback was fantastic. Audiences were super strong. We followed that up with doing, I think, 30 games from the National Women's Soccer League following the World Cup of Soccer. So I think the idea that, we do some of these things that create more awareness and more opportunity, and more is going to follow. And I think for us, you're going to see us continue to invest, because it's not just the right thing to do. It is, but it's also a real business opportunity. And things like the Women's World Cup, things like Bianca really do show that.
We as an industry need to do a better job, but the audiences need to do a better job. When I was at Sportsnet, we put a lot of women's hockey on the air, and the audiences in the arenas weren't there. And we all know that there's nothing quite as dead as an empty arena. On the other hand, we did something I'm very proud of at Sportsnet. We they still own a professional curling tour, the World Curling Tour. And we have a woman who runs that for us, who insisted that we have an equal number of women's events as men's events, and that we pay the same prize money for both sides. We've done that for the last 3 or 4 years, and the ratings for women's curling are equally as good, sometimes better, as Shawn would know, than the men's side. So, we need to do a better job putting it out there, but then the audiences have to come. That the women's sports groups need to do a better job of getting out their audiences. I'll tell you a very quick story that with U Sports, years ago, we did a number of different U Sports finals over the course of one weekend. And the U Sports people said, we're going to put the women's hockey final on Saturday night at 7. And I said, guys, there's this other show that goes Saturday nights at 7 that has something to do with hockey. We're not putting, it's the only time we can get people out to the arena. We're doing it in Calgary. We got to do it that night. We fought them on it. I tuned in. There were 5 people in the rink.
Yeah.
And I called the president of U Sports. I said, that's it. We're not doing the women's championship next year. Not unless you can guarantee me that there are people in the stands. And that's an issue not just for women's sports, but youth sports. So it's not just about the broadcasters and the media companies. It's about fans supporting it. I used to work with a guy who I have a lot of respect for named David Moss at CBC Sports. He had a great phrase. He said, television is not castor oil. We shouldn't be doing things because we think it's good for other people. It's got to be supported by the fans. So it's a chicken and egg. We've got to do a better job of showing women's sports, and fans have got to show up. Just a little plug for Uninterrupted. In February, we're going to do a live Twitter broadcast called Courageous Conversations, Leveling the Field. We'll bring together some of the best in women's sports to talk about how we move the ball down the field on this, because it really is important. And I believe, what happened at the Women's World Cup this past year and the U.S. team opened a ton of eyes. And I don't think they were treated fairly by their federation. I think there's an old phrase, equal pay for work of equal value. They should be paid more than the men, because their value to the U.S. Soccer Federation was higher than the U.S. men.
Hear, hear.
Did you buy a sponsorship here, Scott?
I was going to say,
I did for
knew.
several years. I'm getting my dividends now,
Shameless
Berkey.
plug, shameless plug. And I'll just say, when you talk about needing more people in the rinks to watch women, Brian Burke is you need more Brian Burkes who basically will yell to anybody who will listen, go out, buy tickets. Watch it on TV, yes, but buy tickets, as he always does, to women's hockey games and to other women's sports. So Brian, thank you for always using your pulpit for that. We're now going to open it up to the crowd for questions. If you wanted to raise your hand, anyone? I see, yeah, there's a microphone right behind Trevor and Brian there. If anyone has a question for my esteemed panel, just go up to the microphone, introduce yourself, and ask away.
Hi, my name's Catherine McLeod. I'm a George Brown student. So my question, I have a few, but I'll start with this one. It goes back to 5G and using social media as tools, and the whole double side of the fact of like TikTok being a very big information collector, but we don't have any access to it because of where that information is going. So is that a form of the field that is being looked into, whether the 5G controversy of who we're looking into and where that information is being collected and going to is a factor?
You're the telecom guy.
I certainly will not speak on behalf of the telco. I think from a 5G perspective, from our side of things, there's a couple places that make sense. And this is outside, I think, your question, which is a regulatory question that's much bigger than us and way above our pay grades. It's providing the opportunity to find more efficient ways to produce. So there was, this summer, as you can imagine, golf was one of the most difficult sports to produce. You got a cable, I don't know how many square kilometers of a golf course to get every hole. This summer, Fox did a test at the US Open where they had all of their remote cameras connected by 5G, so they didn't have to cable anywhere on the golf course, produce the entire tournament without a single cable, which is a huge advantage for all of us that want to get more things on TV to start bringing down some of those costs. And then from an interactivity perspective, I've seen some of the demos. Pretty soon you guys will start to see them too, and there are some really cool things that can happen with the 5G technology around how you consume video, the interactive nature of it, what you can do inside the video, scrolling back, going forward, zooming in. It's really cool. And I think is going to present a big opportunity for us, both on the production side, but also on the content consumption side. But I can't speak to the regulatory environment.
Oh, go ahead.
I think he did a great job answering. I have
There
nothing
you
to
go.
add.
All right. Any other questions out there? I know it's Monday morning and it's early, but
Somebody
I
coming to
think
the-
someone is heading to the microphone.
Hi, my name's Chris Fitch, and I work Ottawa Sport and Entertainment Group. Christine, this is actually a question for you, going back to the women's sports broadcasting question that you just asked. As the only female panelist on this panel, I just wanted to get your opinion on it as well. Where
Well-
you think it's going, what needs to be improved on, what are we doing well?
Yeah.
Just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, I think we've come a long way. When I started in 1998 with Scott at Sportsnet, I say, and I've actually been chatting with some of the young women who are here this morning. Growing up, I never thought that I could do this because I didn't see women doing this. Watching Hockey Night in Canada, which was on our family TV every Saturday night, I watched because I had two hockey-playing brothers. I was a huge hockey fan, but it never dawned on me that I could be doing what I'm doing, because when you don't see it, you often don't think that you can. Just the fact that now there are more women doing what I'm doing makes it, I think, more viable. I mean, I'm so thrilled to see the Carolyn Camerons and the Nikki Reyeses and so many other women doing this. So we've come a long way, but Do we still have a long way to go? Yeah, I was thrilled, as I said, with the coverage that we did of the CWHL All-Star Game last year. For the first time, we had an all-female panel on Hockey Night in Canada on International Women's Day, just talking about the issues around women in sports. So we're moving in the right direction. In my opinion, we need either more women who are in those positions of power who can make those decisions, or men who are allies of ours and will also further that. So we've come a long way, but we still have a ways to go. I guess that's how I would say.
Perfect, thank you.
I'd just like to add something, because this is a continuing dialogue, and I think making sure there's better gender balance on television and in sports coverage is really important, but it's not the only diversity issue that we're faced with in sports. Take a look around this room. There's not enough diversity in this room, and part of the reason for that is because diverse populations in Canada look on television, look in the executive ranks. They're not seeing enough of themselves there, and they're not going to look for careers in this industry unless they start to see more people of diverse backgrounds in positions. As I left Sportsnet, I challenged my ex-team to be the first people to put a First Nations sportscaster on the air. I would love to see that. I think it's time. I think there's way too much work to be done, not just on the gender diversity issue, but on diversity being represented in all parts of the sports world in Canada.
Another question.
Hi,
One
Brianne
more.
Michelli. I'm from Humber College. I just kind of wanted to speak in terms of the CWHL and women's hockey specifically. I know during the hockey season, like September to April, you're competing with with the NBA, you're competing with the NHL in terms of broadcasting. Like, do you think offsetting those seasons, like maybe having a summer league for women, would have a better benefit of having more views and more female presence on the air?
I'm not sure putting it in the summer is the way to go. I know the WNBA has looked at that. It's obviously a little different with hockey. I think there's perhaps a better option of being able to look at using existing hockey audiences to draw to the CWHL. The CWHL didn't fold because of broadcast. It was a challenge. It folded because there weren't enough sponsors that came out and supported them. When I was at Sportsnet, we supported them. Scotiabank supported them. Many people in this room supported them, but not enough. And it is a chicken and egg. When we used to schedule their games, we tried to put them around NHL games to make sure that there was a lead-in or lead-out audience. But Jana Hefford, who is one of the brightest minds in hockey generally, she realized that everything had to be revisited, including the fact that there were two competing leagues in North America. I think if you were looking for one reason why the CWHL isn't in existence, that's probably the number one reason. And until there's one women's league in North America, it's probably not going to get back on its feet. So that's job one.
Thank you.
And Trevor, I'm looking to you. One more. Time for one more.
Hi, my name is Michael Sowitz. We are a digital sports company in Montreal. We support many sports, but one sport that we truly think that is growing tremendously is ball hockey. A lot of female, mixed, and male also, even juniors. And what we're realizing is half of it is private, and the other half is the CBHA. So how do you guys see basically the future of ball hockey?
We're getting pitched programming at the PrimeTime Conference. This is great. I need to learn a lot more about it. I mean, I think, Scott made the point before, and it's whether it's David Moss or whether our perspective is, if you don't see people in the stands for an event, then why do you want to watch, right? That's sort of the message that gets sent. So I think in terms of the startup leagues that we've dealt with, and there's many across many sports, sometimes getting to a national broadcaster is not step one, it's step 5. And I think, the first one for me would be how do you build the league? How do you build the grassroots? How do you put people in the stands? And I think that will start to lead to to a broadcast discussion, and in some cases it may not start with the national cable broadcaster. It might start with a digital solution. It might start with your fan base. But I think step number one for many startup leagues that we've dealt with is you got to build your own house first and get some people in the stands, get some scale, and then I think you'll find people will be knocking on your door.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you to everyone. First of all, thank you to Chris, Shawn, and Scott for your wealth of knowledge and sharing it with the crowd here this morning. And thank you to Brian and Trevor, as always, for putting on this event and for having us be a part of it. Enjoy the rest of your day.